Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Montesano. I am talking about our efforts to simulate forest structure change across the taiga tundra ecotone in North America. And this project is led by Amanda Armstrong. And we're a team out of University of Virginia, George Mason University, and NASA Goddard Space Flight Center with backgrounds in Arctic biology, forest modeling, and remote sensing of vegetation. And we're updating a individual-based high-resolution forest growth model. And so we're interested in the taiga tundra ecotone, and it's good to start out sort of understanding where is the taiga tundra ecotone. We conceived of this project partly based on our understanding of the structural patterns of sparse forests in and near this ecotone. And so we've built a Landsat-based forest structure patterns map for this purpose, sort of to target and understand these different types of landscapes within the ecotone. And this helps us sort of target our site scale modeling, which will sort of occur across a very broad extent. But how can we explore, the potential for variation in forest structure and composition change at site scales across this broad domain? So obviously we're going to be using a model, and this slide summarizes some of the key updates, which I won't really talk about in depth. But what model are we using? We're using the model that's called the Cyborg TTE model. It's an individually based forest gap model, which means it's a model that simulates and tracks the growth, mortality, regeneration, and competition of individual trees through time. And so very sort of basically, it takes as input some forest inventory and a multi-scale suite of environmental covariates. And it uses, at the moment, climate data, such as MERA, to hindcast, to explain contemporary climate, and then it uses some CMIP data to forecast future climate. Key updates include the ability to do geographically specific modeling, in an automated way using soil, climate, and cloud cover gridded data, but also a DEM helps us describe important site conditions. And so it's this addition of high-res topography that is one of the real key updates, because it, like I said, it provides site-specific terrain gradients that can influence the interaction of trees over time. And so this supports our objective to compare the variation in site scale changes within landscapes across a broad domain. And so we're just looking at the hillshade here of one of our particular sites. The little red box shows the extent of our 1 hectare modeling site. This one is in the Brooks Range, and we're just seeing an example of 3 time periods of stem maps that emerged from a particular model run at this particular site. And so, okay, so forest inventory is an important input in this process. It imparts site-specific structure and helps us understand the variation in the structure across broad extents. And we've collected it for a variety of taiga tundra ecotone sites. And so for each site, we're able to sort of understand key parameters, such as currents and structure and density and landscape classification of each site. And so along with fine scale topography, these parameters provide needed ability to describe important variation, and also which will help with understanding the heterogeneity of change. So this forest inventory helps us build species-specific allometry of forest structure for trees and shrubs. And so what we're looking at here is some biomass DBH allometry that's embedded within this forest structure. And we can access this allometry and sort of extract it and help and use it to initialize the modeling of structure from the Cyborg TTE model. And it's used to compare simulated, and so we're using this information embedded in the forest inventory data to simulate biomass densities for each species at our focal sites. And so here's just a quick sort of validation of some of the biomass density that we've simulated at these focal sites. So we're using the forest inventory to validate the simulations of forest structure. And so this scatter plot shows the simulated versus observed biomass densities of species at our most current set of focal sites We don't have a lot of focal sites at this point, but we're increasing them. Most of the plot and species simulation results here that we're seeing are close to reference totals with a bit of scatter in a couple plots for a couple species at the high end that we'll continue to work on. But this generally gives us confidence in our model's ability to simulate biomass and biomass change. And so we're building a database of site level biomass density time series. And so here we're showing simulations of biomass density for a time series across 200 years for the 13 sites that are currently in our database. These simulated time series have a few key features for addressing the variability of change, of predicted changes in structure and composition. So they show the amount of change in tree and shrub biomass at each site. Just note that the magnitude of the y-axes differ here. And they also show the relative amounts of biomass contributed by individual species. So it's this kind of information that we're simulating, and then we're kind of diving into and digging into to understand within site and across site variation. And so this variation shows, so this database shows us the variation in simulated changes across landscapes when we group similar sites. So there's a lot of ways to kind of look at this database. And so we're exploring ways to do that. And so here we're summarizing this variation in above ground biomass density with stacked bar plots. And we've grouped sites according to sort of general landscape regions. And I should note here that the place names that we're using for right now may not be the most appropriate place names. We'll look to update those place names with maybe some important local knowledge in the future. But for now, we're kind of using the place names that appear on maps for better or worse. So these plots show the simulated changes in above ground biomass density at 20-year intervals from 1980 to 2100, starting with the years indicated on the x-axis. These bars are stacked according to the magnitude of the change rate for both trees and shrubs. And it shows, the predicted landscape trends of these two types of structures up until 2100. So it's this type of wrangling that we're doing to be able to sort of group sites and tease out important landscape differences within this broad domain. And so it's interesting to understand, how shrubs are driving change across one landscape, whereas trees may be driving change across another landscape. But what's a little more interesting to us is the ability to also break this information down according to species composition. So we're also looking at sort of this more detailed species level composition information. Here we've colored the biomass density change bars according to species, and this highlights the increase in biomass of deciduous tree species in Western Canada taiga, of Betula shrubs in the YK Delta, and of white spruce in the Brooks Range and Seward Peninsula sites. And so these results are very preliminary, and they're based on only a few sites right now. And so our efforts going forward will include significantly increasing the number of sites so that we can have more confidence in the patterns within a landscape and more confidence in our ability to compare dynamics across landscapes. And so it's interesting to see these predictions of change in structure and species composition. But what will also be interesting is sort of comparing these simulated changes with changes that have been observed on the landscape. So what you're seeing here is a wall-to-wall map of changes in boreal tree canopy cover over the past 36 years. And so this is part of an effort that was recently submitted for publication by a group from TerraPulse in College Park, Maryland, and NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, as well as help from ABR in Fairbanks. And this shows multi-decadal changes in tree cover from the Landsat record. And green, you can see green and purple hotspots on the map showing positive and negative forest structure changes at the 30-meter scale across this extent. And so it'll be interesting to think about these simulated changes across TTE landscapes in light of the changes that have been observed already. So to conclude here and sort of summarize, we've enhanced a spatially explicit individual-based gap model called Cyborg TTE to run with input derived from a range of multi-scale gridded products. And this helps examine variation at site scales across broad domains. And we're validating these simulations of forest structure with forest inventory at some of our focal sites. And then we're continuing to build a database of simulations sort of to increase our confidence in our ability to understand patterns within landscapes. And also we'll be interested in comparing these simulations to change with recent trends in forest structure across the TTE. And so next, Elise Heffernan will discuss her work to initialize the Cyborg TTE model with Tundra PFTs to examine shrub dynamics in the tundra. And so I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Great, right on time. So we have a couple minutes for questions. If anyone has a question for Paul, please raise your hand or put it in the chat. I guess Logan, go ahead.
Hey, Paul, thanks for the presentation. I was wondering if you guys have used the model to look at kind of specific underlying drivers of some of the changes that you're seeing. If you can try to get at the mechanisms of change with the model.
Yeah, we haven't dug into that yet. There's actually a lot of, what I didn't talk about is there's a lot of work, particularly on the part of Amanda and Batu, to sort of on model development. And so there are a number of components associated with this development that are still ongoing. And once we get those in place and we test the next version of the model, we're probably going to be looking more closely at drivers.
Okay, great. I think in the interest of time, we can move on and then come back to this discussion at the end of all the talks. So next, we're going to hear from Elise Heffernan from the University of Virginia on integrating tundra PFTs into an individual-based boreal forest gap model to capture vegetation dynamics at the tundra taiga ecotone. Take it away.
Sorry, I was on the wrong. There's my title slide. Sorry, guys. Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks, Paul, for the good intro. So I'm going to be talking about how we are integrating specifically shrubs into the model. It's been a source of a lot of challenges and great opportunities for our group. And so that's the main topic that I'm going to get into. So Paul sort of went into this a little bit, but how are we growing trees in the Cyborg TTE model? So it's an individual-based gap model. So it's really driving growth through light and shading. And then growth is kind of knocked back with site quality and nutrient availability. And then we have a couple other stressors like wildfire and herbivory that's kind of coming down the pipeline as we get the model all put together. So we have allometric equations that are calculating growth. We get these from either plot data or literature. Seeds are randomly distributed, so it's a very sexual reproduction sort of driven model. And we get our annual growth increments also from literature. So I'm going to come back to some of the problems with that. So one of the biggest challenges to growing shrubs are really just that shrubs aren't trees. They're multi-stem plants. We usually ignore them for allometry because historically people weren't interested in how shrubs are growing. They just want to know how forests are growing and the main trees in them. Shrubs also have a really strong ramette production. So it's that asexual reproduction that's giving them a lot of advantages in challenging environments. And currently we're just growing them as mini trees, which is going pretty well, but it doesn't really get at this, how they are structurally different and functionally different from trees. And so the question that we're trying to answer is, why are shrubs succeeding more than trees? Why are shrubs succeeding more than trees in some places like the tundra, whereas the tree line, you have a bit more of a mixed bag of whether trees or shrubs are winning, if you will. So one of the problems that we have been encountering is that where we're working is much farther north than many of the allometries in literature have been described for. So since allometries tend to be really species or region specific, it's been a real challenge to get actually enough data up north in the ecotone where we are trying to apply them. So we are worried about overgrowing the trees essentially for these environments. And then a lot of really just we're challenged with history where a lot of early modeling has been focused on growing forests, and we're trying to grow a boreal forest tundra ecotone. And so while other species have historically seen as growth distractors and just haven't really been addressed, we're trying to bring those back in to really make it a whole ecosystem model as an individual base cap model. So Paul went over this map. So I'm just going to really briefly reiterate. The red is an abrupt ecotone, and the yellow is a more diffuse ecotone. And so we have some NFI sites that we've been looking at specifically that we sort of just picked to be a pretty good transect across the Northwest Territories. And just a really quick shout out to the National Forest Inventory of Canada. We are so appreciative of the data that they have shared with us. We would be lost without them, really. So just to really quickly go into what these sites are kind of telling us. So with some of the challenges we have with plot data, which is like the highest form of data, we have our stem counts, which are only looking at things that are at least have a measurable DBH. So it has to be at least 1.3 meters tall. And so you can see on the left-hand side, we have the stem count data points, and the species are along the bottom. And you can see basically that they're not matching what's on the right-hand side, which is our percent cover values, which are divided by the upper bar is a 2 to 10 meter range, and the less than 2 meter range is on the bottom bar. And so we're missing a lot between the two of them, and they're both complementary and a little confusing whenever we're trying to initialize these sites. And so part of our struggle has been to just match them together. And the percent cover, our shrub species are these blue, this like bright blue and this purple for Betula and Salix. And they're just really not quite as well represented in the stem count. And it's probably just because they're not tall enough. So that's one thing that we've been struggling to really tease apart. So another problem that we've been having is that percent cover is not actually modeled in Cyborg. So we get biomass and leaf area, but we don't actually get a percent cover value, which has been another trouble we have with actually estimating our shrub values across not even just the NFI sites, but whenever we put it somewhere new. And so these graphs are, now I've taken those NFI sites and I've put them into the model itself. So this is the modeled version of what their sites were for about 2000. And so you can see on the left is the left is still a stem count graph, so stem count and by species across. And then on the right, we have biomass, since like I said, we don't have percent cover. And you can kind of see that it appears more diverse in the stem count and biomass than it did in the percent cover and stem count of the actual data sites or data values, field data values, sorry. It's also been really hard for us to assess by the data would be monospecific sites, because we haven't started looking at the other species. We've been looking at these 3 tall shrub species. And so we know that they're not actually monospecific sites. They're just appearing that way in the model. And so there's not really that, is it interacting effect? We don't have a great proxy for biomass, which I'll get into in the next slide. And a lot of our allometry is the basis of a lot of our variables. So the patterns between DBH, biomass, and specific leaf area aren't going to change when we're trying to assess an allometry with percent cover. And so that's been really challenging for one of my students has been helping me with that this summer. So this is just a comparison directly between Cyborg, which is the model on the y-axis, and our actual field data on the x-axis. And so our stem counts are pretty good. We're slightly underestimating our stem count, and I think that comes from basically that we're using the stem count data from the field data, and we're pretty sure we're missing a lot of the stems that are actually there that just don't get caught by traditional field analysis or field methods. And then this graph is sort of just to reiterate that biomass is not a great proxy for percent cover. And so I used our modeled biomass. And if you remember Paul's graph of our modeled biomass to our field biomass, they're actually a pretty good relationship. And so this is kind of just to reiterate that the relationships are kind of a mess and not really that great between biomass and percent cover. And so that's a challenge that we're still going to have to kind of figure out as we go to our next steps. And then just to look at it with climate change, because always important. The red is our 2100 and the blue is 2000. And so on the left, we still have stem counts. And this time I just divided by shrub or Tundra PFT. And so we have tall shrubs, then deciduous and conifers. And on the right, we have biomass change divided up the same way. And so basically what we've been seeing is model shows decreasing stems, but increasing biomass, which could be showing that infill that we've been sort of seeing over the past couple of years. So even though there's fewer stems, some are dying off because of the stress of climate change. The ones that are making it are just getting bigger and bigger. And then, so one thing that was interesting though, is that's really sort of dominant at the top northern sites. And then at the more southern sites, it's a bit more of a mixed bag of sometimes they're just infilling both with biomass and with stems. And so we're mostly still growing trees. And so we have to really highlight how shrubs are getting that competitive advantage that we're seeing on the ground, but not maybe seeing necessarily in the model. So all of that said, we have a lot of opportunities going forward with shrub modeling. It'll push the model to be more accurate with our actual ground data and things that we're seeing. It's a chance to develop reliable shrub allometric functions so that once we have them, like other models can come in and use them also. So it'll be just elevating the whole system. And then I mentioned earlier that shrubs really grow with ramette reproduction. And so it'll give us a chance to have two different types of sexual reproduction at the ecotone. And a lot of reproduction up there is in fact asexual because it's just so hard to be a tree, which is our model indicates might be getting a little easier, but still pretty hard. And then it'll just help us consider why maybe our models are historically biased for trees because they have been developed to grow trees, and just kind of inching it towards better representation of shrubification, which is a phenomenon happening all over, not just at the, with climate change, not just at the ecotone. And then also with shrubs being better represented, it'll improve our radiative feedback model with submodel within the model. And so it'll just make everything about the models better. So that is everything I've got. Thanks so much. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, does anyone, we have time for a question or two. If anyone has a question for Elise, please raise your hand or put it in the chat. Well, I had a question. So I guess you were looking at the shrubs, the sort of tree-like shrubs initially, right? So have you thought about how you might incorporate shrubs that are like prostrate or?
Yeah, so those ones we're gonna have to just kind of change how they grow generally, because we're not gonna really get allometries out of that kind of field data. And so it'll be more of like just a biomass kind of growing blobs. Amanda always calls it like green blobs basically. And we'll just have to figure out how to make it so that they have stature versus like the moss, which will come, which is already in the model. And so it'll be something that someone much smarter than me will figure out, and I'll just be there to say, yeah, that looks like what it would look like.
Great. Yes, Brendan, I agree. Green blobs is a great term. Maybe one more question? Go ahead, Brendan.
And apologies if I missed this. This is both for Elise and Paul. I was really interested to see your biomass change simulations, and I was curious, did you have any ground plots that had repeat measurements that you could validate not only the biomass, but the biomass change between a given interval?
My sites don't. I don't know if some of Paul's did.
No, we've been looking for that, and we're going to have to actually set out and make a more earnest effort to get that information. But right now, with these plots that are in our database right now, we haven't seen that.
One problem I would say is to get the quality of data that we can use is so time intensive that redoing it is probably financially very challenging.
For sure.
Yeah, I wonder if there's any way to use remote sensing to sort of try to interpolate from one time to another. But
yeah, that I think is our next step to get that going.
Cool. Okay, well, I like this discussion, but let's table it again. Sorry. Okay, so next we're going to hear from Dawei Luo, who's going to talk about climate change effect on the growth and yield of improved white spruce and lodgepole pine in Alberta, Canada. Dawei, can you share your screen?
Yeah.
Great.
Can I see that? Okay.
Yes, all good. Take it away.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Dawei Luo, and I'm from University of Alberta. I'm a PhD candidate from Thomas Tree Improvement Lab, and it's very happy today to make this presentation. And my presentation title is Climate Change Effects on Improved Growth and Yield of Improved White Spruce and Lodgepole Pine. And I'd like to say thank you to all co-authors for this research, and of course, all the sponsors for this conference and all the sponsors for my PhD program. And as we know that climate change has been a big challenge in the past decades and has been observed with significant impacts on forestry. And in Alberta, the challenge associated with climate change for forestry include increasing mortality, growth reduction, and shrinking forest land base, and insect outbreak, etc., etc. And the continuous climate change stress is going to have impact on two major commercial tree species in Alberta, including white spruce and lodgepole pine. And they account for 90% of annual reforestation on average. And in 2019, about 65% of white spruce seeds and 21% of lodgepole pine seeds were accounted for by genetically selected seeds. And we can see that there was a trend of increase in the investments on tree improvement. And this increase of investments has made it necessary and challengeable work to figure out how climate change will impact improved trees, especially these two main tree species. Therefore, the main objective of this study is to explore a quantitative method to predict the growth and yield for improved lodgepole pine and white spruce under the climate change scenarios. To answer this question, we made use of data from both progeny and Provenance Trials in Alberta. And the map A represents the white spruce progeny trials, and the map B represents the white spruce Provenance Trials, and the maps C and D represent the lodgepole pine progeny and Provenance Trials, respectively. And in all of these four maps, the orange dots represent the provenance and the cyan dots represent the test site. We have over 500 and over 1,000 families selected for white spruce and lodgepole pine from the progeny trials, respectively, and 50 and 44 populations selected from provenance trials for white spruce and lodgepole pine. And for simplicity, families and populations are both referred to as populations hereafter. And this selected data covers a wide range of precipitation and the temperature as shown by this figure. For white spruce, the range of mean annual precipitation is between 400 and 1,000 millimeters. for both progeny and Provenance trials, and temperature is between a mean annual temperature is between -4 and +2 degrees. And for Lodgepole pine, the precipitation is basically the same between 400 and 1,000 millimeters. And the temperature for the progeny trials has a range between -4 and 2 degrees, which is this one. And for Provenance trials, we have less observation. So the temperature, the difference of temperature is only about 2 degrees. And this slide shows a simplified flow chart. The first step we used is to we made use of the provenance climates and the climate transfer distance to estimate the height proportion for each population tested in different sites, which is compared to the same population's growth at their provenances. And then we merged the height proportion function with the genetic gain and use them to modify top height curves and site index. Since site index and top height are the main drivers of GPC, the growth annual projection system, which is currently used the growth annual model in Alberta, then the corresponding stand level volume could be correspondingly predicted. We selected the 3 climate change scenarios in this study, including RCP 2.6, 4.5, and 8.5, and they represent different levels of greenhouse gas emission and consequential global warming level. After comparing available climate variables and functions, we selected a second-degree polynomial function to predict the population's relative height growth, its response to climate. And we found that for white spruce, its height growth is mostly influenced by the mean coldest month temperature. And for Lodgepole pine, its population mean height growth is mostly influenced by the mean annual precipitation. And we found that adding age did not change the prediction accuracy, which means that the relative height growth of the population when it's moving around is basically independent of age. And the height proportion, as expected, varies with population, and a single peak feature was captured by the height proportion function, as shown by this heat map. An increase in temperature will benefit high growth of white spruce populations with a cold provenance. And for the white spruce population with a warm provenance mean coldest month temperature, the increase of temperature in the future will have negative effects on its growth. And a similar pattern is found for Lodgepole pine. And the optimum mean annual precipitation is around 500 millimeters. And the effects from climate change will have it could have both positive and negative effects on the height growth for Lodgepole pine. If we add above height proportion into the top height curves, we'll see difference between species and between improved and unimproved sea lots. We selected 4 test sites which basically cover the minimum and the maximum mean coldest month temperature for white spruce, and we set the planting year at 2011, and we can see that for white spruce with a warm provenance mean coldest month temperature, such as site G to 76D, and we can see that an increase of temperature will have a significant negative impact on the height growth, especially when we compare the black curves with the red one. The black curve is with no climate change, and the red one is for the RCP 8.5, which is the most severe climate change scenarios. And for the white spruce population with cold provenance temperature, such as this one, G133A, an increase of temperature in the future will show positive effects on the height growth. And the dashed curve here represents the improved seed loss with 10%. height gain, and the solid curve represents the unimproved sea lots. And we can also see a difference between improved and unimproved one. In the sites where climate is going to have a negative effects on the growth, the improved sea lots of white spruce will retain their advantage over the unimproved. And in the place where the increase of temperature will show positive effects on the height growth, the improved sea lots will be outgrown by the unimproved. And for Lodgepole pine, we also selected 4 test sites. And the planting year is still set as 2011. And in all of these 4 selected sites, the height is projected to decrease in the future. And another thing that we observe in these curves is that the drop of top height is observed. For example, in site G346B and G346A, the top height for the Lodgepole pine dropped at around 50 years old. And this means a decrease in the maximum height that could be supported by the future climates, and probably the mortality of the top height trees under the extreme climate change scenarios. And we also applied the above height proportion change to all the measured provenance and tested sites within Alberta. And we selected RCP 8.5 in this case, and the 3 years, 2025, 2055, and 2085 for unimproved sea lots and improved sea lots with 10% of height gain. And we'll see that for sorry.
Keep going. Just please mute yourself if you. Yeah.
Sorry. And we can see that for white spruce in the northern Alberta, we see the green color, which means that in this climate change scenarios, the white spruce height growth is going to increase in the northern Alberta, and from the middle to the southwestern Alberta, we will see decrease in heights for white spruce. And for Lodgepole pine, in most of these sites, they show the climate change was so negative effect on the Lodgepole pine height growth, except some sites in the north. And if we compare the improved and unimproved sea lots for both species, we can see that in the northern Alberta, the red color indicates that the improved sea lots for both species will be outgrown by the unimproved. And then in the middle Alberta to the southwestern Alberta, the improved sea lots will still remain their growth advantage over the unimproved. So in conclusion, we found that the height growth is mostly influenced by mean coldest month temperature for white spruce and mostly influenced by mean annual precipitation for Lodgepole pine. And the future climate change is expected to increase the white spruce growth for those populations originated from a cold province, but decreased growth is expected for the white spruce population from a warmer province. And for Lodgepole pine, the growth decrease is predicted to happen at a provincial scale, and the improved sea lots for both species can be used to alleviate negative impact from the climate change. And that's it for my presentation. Thank you. Any questions?
Great, thank you so much. I think we have time for maybe one question. Anyone has a question, please raise your hand or put it in the chat. I guess I had a question. So, I guess in the previous sessions, we were talking a lot about lodgepole pine and fire dynamics, but I was also wondering these results, what you think about them in the context of maybe biotic disturbance agents, so like bark beetles, how that might influence changes in light of your results.
Well, actually, my results I did not consider, for example, the fire frequency or the insect things. But that would be very useful to incorporate them. I have only focused on the climate change itself, like on the growth of trees themselves, and also after accounting for other variations. So yeah, just the climate change on the growth itself. Other things I did not consider.
Okay, cool. Okay, well, maybe in the interest of time, let's move on and we can discuss more after the talks. So next, we're going to hear from Miriam Isaac Renton from the Canadian Forest Service on selecting suitable seed sources for reforestation in the north. So Miriam, go ahead. Great. You're muted if you're speaking, Miriam.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. Oh, good. Anyway, hi everyone. Thank you for attending my presentation. I'm just going to turn this on. So once again, my name is Miriam, and I will speak today about selecting suitable seed sources for reforestation in the north. So the aim, of course, is to enhance resilience through reforestation. And I guess for context, but I'm sure everyone here well understands the effects of climate change. But we're expecting warmer conditions combined with higher variability. So what this means is that we are also expecting an increase in the impacts of drought and heat on our forests, as we're already seeing here, most notably this summer in Western Canada. Counterintuitively, frost also is becoming an increasing problem because warming is leading to longer growing seasons. So plants might be exposed to frost risk during the longer shoulder seasons, which coincides with that increasing variability. So this is important because there's actually genetic adaptation to climate. So over time, a population of trees growing in a region become genetically adapted to their local environmental conditions. And usually they are adapted to some form of aridity or some form of cold, because these extreme climate events are really the selection pressures. So usually they're adapted to the extremes of a climate envelope, not necessarily the averages. So this means that as climates become warmer and more variable, trees might become maladapted to warming and also to climate extremes. So one potential solution to this problem of maladaptation includes reforestation. And in Canada, we have a huge forested area, which you can see illustrated in the dark gray on the map on the right. And every year we plant millions, like in Canada, we plant 500 million seedlings every year. And that's also going to be increasing with initiatives like the 2 billion tree program. So there is a lot of potential to match the right seed source with the right environment. And we can do this through seed transfer options like assisted migration. It is important to evaluate risk trade-offs with seed transfer though. So there is a big risk of not doing anything, of just status quo reforestation, because it means that those seedlings that we're planting now are going to become increasingly maladapted. However, if you move them too far into a temporarily colder climate, those trees still have to survive and grow through today's climate to reach the projected warmer climates of the future. So it is really important to get it right. And fortunately, this can be studied with Provenance Trials. The Provenance Trials are reciprocal transplant experiments involving collecting seed from across a species range and planting them at common garden trial sites. So this is now illustrated with the map on the right, where you can see the dark gray is the Lodgepole pine range, and black triangles represent common garden sites. The colored circles represent seed sources or provenances. And each seed source in this case here is colored according to the population or group, with dark orange representing the far south of the range, the yellow representing the southern interior of BC, and the green color representing the central interior of BC, and the blue representing northern seed sources. So by moving the seed sources around and growing them in these common gardens, you can start to understand the extent of local adaptation. So just give me a second. I think I'm going to move this away. I'm not sure if you're able to see that, but it's probably less important for you. Anyway, so these are really, really beautiful designs, and many of these older experiments, like these older Provenance trials, are now being repurposed as real-world climate change laboratories. And this is because if you transfer seed sources to warmer environments, you're testing how they might perform under a simulated climate warming scenario. And if you transfer seed sources to a cooler environment, say northward, you are testing an assisted migration scenario. And now that some of these trials are becoming older, we can also take tree increment cores to study how each of these seed sources performs under specific climate events, like those extremes like drought and frost. So what we did is we used the design with 23 provenances tested on 9 sites, where 3 of those sites experienced a drought in 2002, which is also illustrated on the map on the right. And we use this to understand how populations are adapted to drought, how populations are adapted to cold, and to evaluate how seed transfer might be able to help. So when looking at the response to drought, we found a really interesting curvy linear relationship where the provenances from the furthest south in the range were most drought resilient, which is shown on the x-axis. But there was a trade-off with height growth, which is shown on the y-axis. The provenances from the middle part of the range had relatively good drought resilience and the best height growth. However, the northern populations generally had lower drought resilience and also lower height. So this was a bit surprising, but it was actually found at the physiological level as well. So this suggests that northern populations could be maladapted to drought under a severe climate warming scenario. So instead of always benefiting from warming in the north, they might actually be limited by extremes. So there's a nuance there. And while we were exploring the physiology behind these responses, we were actually evaluating wood anatomy, which is shown in this picture on the left here. So what you're looking at is a cross section of wood, and it is pink because of a double staining procedure where cellulose is dyed blue and lignin is dyed red with safranine. And so the effect, of course, is together that they look pink. And what you're looking at here is a tree ring boundary and all the tracheids within that. So you can see the early wood, I'm just going to use my mouse, you can see the early wood cells here, then the late wood cells, the ring boundary, and then the early wood cells of the next year. However, we found signatures of fall frost damage, which show up here in blue. So because there's no lignin absorbing the red stain, only the blue cellulose is shining through. And so fall frost can stop the process of lignification in the last part of the late wood. And when they were really big, like in this image here on the right, this was sometimes associated with malformed early wood cells. So what you can see here in the early wood there. And we think this is a form of very severe fall frost that actually damaged the cambial tissue as well, which then had to reform in the early wood of the next year's growing season. And finally, we also observed damage in the early wood, which must be associated with a spring event because it's in the early wood. And we found actually that it was linked to spring frost. So a combination of warmth followed by frost. And we use these frost signatures archived in the tree rings to understand genetic differences in response to cold in these common gardens. So we found genetic differences in these effects with the southern populations showing higher frequencies of fall frost damage. And that's true here. So this is the fall cold event, the blue ring. This is the really severe fall frost event. So the warmer colors there represent the further south populations, and the north represents seed sources. Those are illustrated in blue. But what's really interesting is that the northern populations show higher frequencies of spring frost damage. So it seems like northern populations could be maladapted to cold under climate change as well, which is a bit counterintuitive. But the reason we think is that they are adapted to really strong temperature differences among seasons and a very short growing season. So they have low heat sun requirements. So this means that they tend to flush at the first sign of warming. And then this is a problem under climate change, of course, because we're expecting disproportionate warming in polar regions and also disproportionate warming in winter. So it seems likely that they will grow too soon and get hit hard when variable temperatures bring it back to freezing again. But I guess the question is, why does this matter? So this is just correlative. But it's very interesting to observe that a big decline in growth occurred right after 1992, which was the year with by far the highest frequencies of spring frost damage. So it looks like it could have a big impact. And as you can see also illustrated in the cross section there of the wood, it also creates these zones of weakness that are problematic structurally for the tree, but they devalue the timber as well, so you get frost shake. And it also allows pathogens to spread easily within the tree, so that could also reduce forest health. So altogether, it sounds like northern tree populations might be impacted by a combination of warming, drought, and frost, so both extremes. But can new seed transfer approaches like assisted migration help through reforestation? So if we look here at the growth in the northern regions, so what's being shown here is the basal area.
Yeah, 1 minute, Miriam.
Oh, thank you. So the green line, just very quickly, is the assisted migration. But populations move to the north, and you can see that there's actually a rank change in growth that occurs around 2005. So it looks like assisted migration can really help. Assisted migration could really help with the issue of maladaptation of northern forests under climate change. So northern forests, to summarize, are at risk under climate change due to warming and drought, plus warming and frost. Assisted migration seems to be a suitable solution. And there's also major impacts or potential benefits from assisted migration and reforestation, because billions of trees are planted every year. So thanks for your attention, and I would be happy if there's time to answer any questions you might have now, although we had a bit of a delay there. But also feel free to shoot me an email if you would prefer to carry on the conversation that way. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. I think we have time for a question.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Mario, go ahead.
Okay, first of all, many thanks for this interesting presentation. And
yeah, can you speak up, Mario, a little bit?
Okay, sorry, I can get closer to the microphone maybe. So when I was looking at the wood anatomical images, the severe fall frost event, why do you think this is fall frost and not spring frost in the next year? So,
sorry, I can't hear you very well. I'm just going to crank up my volume. Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Sorry, I will also try to fix my microphone. Very sorry about
that. That's better. That's perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay.
I think so. I caught something about frost, polar regions, and that was about it.
Yeah, I was just wondering if it is fall frost or spring frost in the second image that you showed. So the second image.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if you still see my screen here.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, this is a really good question and something we get fairly often. So I don't know if you can see, but this here is the ring.
Well, the third image. Sorry, the third image. So severe fall cold event. So this looks to me rather like spring frost, I would say.
Yeah, you know, so it is really interesting because we do have the cane damage in the early wood. So initially we also thought it was spring frost, but we noticed that this specific signature of how those cells look like, very malformed, always occurred, and not always, but if they did occur, they always occurred with this very big blue ring. So here's like a smaller blue ring, here's a thicker one. So that's why we thought, okay, and it is still related, when we did the climate analysis, it is more related to the fall event, if you look at the daily weather. But yeah, so it tends to be linked to this fall frost signature in the late wood, and then sometimes, rarely, you get this more really severe event that occurs right at the boundary of the tree line. And so we think that because it's right at the boundary, there's no normal cell growth, and then a distortion in the wood. It's like it's immediately at the boundary. So we think that the cane root tissue was damaged from the previous fall frost, which obviously is very severe because of the large blooming. And then it just takes some time for it to become normal, I guess, to adjust. But compare that, for example, to the oh, I don't know if I'm making a way. I don't know if you can see this, but just move that. But yeah, so here in the early wood, this is a bit distinct because you have some normal growth starting to occur, and then you have the distortion. So I think just because of the combination of it being right at the ring boundary, followed by this signature of fall frost, and then also the I guess it's always just correlative, but it's this link with the fall climate or weather variables that we have rather than spring. I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yes, definitely. Many thanks. I find that very interesting.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, I do too. So I'm always excited to talk about it, and I'm always thrilled when people think so as well. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Miriam. I think we're going to move on. So next, we're going to hear from Elena Zukovka, who's from the Institute of Physiochemical and Biological Problems in Soil Science at the Russian Academy of Sciences. And it's going to talk about the influence of tree canopy on the mosaic of the forest ground vegetation. So Miriam, if you could just stop sharing your screen. Thank you. And then go ahead. Elena, if you want to share your screen.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
One moment. I can start now.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. The topic of our report, influence of the tree canopy on the mosaic of the forest ground vegetation. Our study focuses on investigating drivers on the ground vegetation dynamics as a part of research of simulation, productivity, and biodiversity of boreal and temperate forests. The dynamics of the vegetation of the ground layer depends on the heterogeneity of the condition under the forest canopy, illumination under the canopy, soil moisture, soil richness with nitrogen. The largest contribution to the dynamics of elements is given by the dominant species of plants with a cover of more than 50%. Most of these are in forest are long rhizomatous plants. On the slide, you can see some forest plants with long rhizomes the spatial distribution of dwarf shrubs, bilberry and ligonberry, in two types of forest of the Moscow region, Russia, was studied. A even age single species pine forest without underground on sandy soil, and mixed stands different ages, Pinus sylvestris, Spicea abies, Betula pendula, Tilia cordata, on sandy loam soils. Illumination under the canopy. Above ground shoots of dwarf shrubs are absent when less than 7% of photosynthetical active radiation is transmitted below the canopy. The single shoots survive at the illumination from 7 to 10%. When the illumination is more than 10%, the coverage of dwarf shrubs is 60–80%. The soil moisture and soil richness. Bilberry is more resistant to higher soil moisture, which determine position of the vessels on the lower part of microrelief. Ligonberry occupies higher patch. Bilberry is low part, and ligonberry the higher patch that is determined by the deep location of its rhizomes and root system. The results was using in series of simulation experiments using the Ifimod Campus S Romal-Hum model system made it possible to analyze the influence of spatial heterogeneity on the dynamics of species structure of the forest ground vegetation, as well as on carbon and nitrogen stocks in forest soils. This slide presents publications on the topic of the report. Thank you for your attention.
Great, thank you so much. We have lots of time for questions. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand or put it in the chat. I guess I had a question about maybe like fire and how wildfire sort of plays a role in your results or doesn't.
Это был вопрос.
Sorry?
In our study, we now we did not see this point in our research.
Okay, cool.
Our colleague from St. Petersburg have such research.
Oh, okay. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, if there aren't any more questions right now, I guess we can maybe move on so that we can stay on time frame. So last but definitely not least, we're going to hear from Vyacheslav Karbuk from the Sukachev Institute and Siberian Federal University, who's going to talk about tree migration into the Siberian Alpine tundra. So please go ahead and share your screen.
Works.
Great.
Works.
And Elena, maybe you could mute yourself.
Is it okay with sharing screen?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay. Opa, last slide. Oh, listen. Good evening, dear colleagues. Thank you for the option to present our results about the tree migration in the Siberian Alpine tundra. You know that tree-line uphill and downhill migrations are linked with the climate warming current. And you see here the examples of tree-line migration in the southern Siberian mountains, in the southern Siberian mountains. This is during last previous millennium, and in the northern Siberian mountains. Here you can see the position of the tree line during the little ice age period here and here, and then tree line is coming up and up in both in the southern and in northern Siberian mountains. And the latest uphill migration wave observed since say about from 60s or 70s of the last century. Trees uphill migration patterns. Trees are typically migrated uphill by clusters, and also trees diffusion occurred on the leeward slopes. Here, this picture taken with the southern Siberian mountains look like the tree are diffusing along the elevation gradient, but in the general cases, trees, because very harsh windy conditions, they are established behind some boulders or felled trees, or within some micro relief features. And these hedges, yes, many scientists consider that it is fascinating pattern of hedges and ribbons. It is which observed in European Alps, in USA, Japan, and New Zealand, and in other countries. The term hedges refer to the parallel linear patterns formed by trees on the windward slopes. This is hedge. And ribbon forests are linear tree strips separated by meadows, like this one. And again, here in examples of this is ribbon forest. This is on the northern part of Siberia, above the polar circle, and by way of trees, large trees, large Gmelini, they are coming up to uphill in the Putarana mountains here in this area. This in the south this is also in the southern mountains. Here the test sites where we conducted, I believe this is not all, conducted our studies. We consider the following issues. First, hedges and ribbons response to observed climate change in Siberian mountains, and second one, the mechanism of hedges and the ribbon formation. The main tree species that form the hedges. It is Larex sibirica, Larex gmelini, birch, betel tortosa, and in less, and also Pinus sibirica and fir. But fir is less resistant, wind resistant and cold resistant. Siberian pine, it is it is rather wind resistant and cold resistant, but larch is their leader in their cold and wind resistance. Also, Also, surprisingly, birch, betel tortuosa, it means a twisted birch. The stems of these trees are adapted to the wind impact. They are very wind resistant. It's also can be the leader of the hedges. Like here, hedges starts from the birch, then the other species are settled after it protected by its crown, like a larch and a Siberian pine here. And also here, also the birch and Siberian pine is behind. And the study area here, this is Altai Sayani Mountain, and this circles the sites where we observed the phenomenon and try to elucidate how this works. And this is some pattern of the on-ground studies. We established a test plot along the elevation transects and counting the regeneration and etc. And using the technology, make an analysis of the trees increment, etc. And some results. This is a case study on the Altai Mountains. Why it is interesting? It is our very first of our study when our dear American colleagues, they shared it with us, say satellite sky high resolution images. And you see that this is temporal raw. This is yes, you see that it is 60s taken, then about in 80s, and then in this century. And you see this is clusters of the hedges, and they are increasing, and new clusters appeared. And this is the dynamic of the tree clusters area and tree clusters age in that particular area. And how hedges are formatting? First, uphill warming induced regeneration established first at higher extremes within the microtopography shelters. Example of terrace rises, boulders, or the trees, and hedges always oriented along the prevailing winds and regularly formed a dense aerodynamically friendly crown, which protects them from the desiccation and snow abrasion. Once hedge leader, here, for example, here, what is the leader which was established first one, or here now it is within the almost middle of the hedge. Once a hedge leader established, that initiating a positive feedback, example, snow accumulation increase, amelioration of dirt stress, biogenic element accumulation that encourage subsequent tree established behind the leader. With warming, spaces between hedges are filling with new regeneration, and hedges are transforming into close forests in the final stage of the evolution, if it happens, because some hedges they persist for for a very long time within such a windy, very windy. Possibly with a form of future warming, they also form in this treeless area, or maybe will be close stands. Oops. Too much. And what is the hedges age and growth increment structure? Here you see the structure. It is a trees, gray columns. It is trees. This is 0. It is the oldest trees which first was established. -1, -3. That means that in some cases hedges grows not by the tail, it is a main mechanism, but also from its, its nose. And here the radial increment. The almost 0 increment or close to it. No, it is not 0, like this one. Very low, all these trees, hedge founders, they are lowest increment, but new trees, which are protected by these old trees, they have a higher radial increment. And you see here another picture which illustrates this statement. This is a growth increment since this data of the oldest trees, and this is more younger, and the highest increment, as you can see on this chart. You see it with age, the increment is increasing, and increasing. And it is connected, hedges also connected to the transformation of the tree morphology. Regularly in the literature, it was described primarily that hedges formed by Krumholz, for example, Holtmeyer indicated that. But now we observed widespread transformation of the former prostrate forms of Krumholz to the vertical upright forms, because warmer, less strong wind impact, less severe wind impact, so they can survive even being not prostrating, not to be as a slaves, but also as almost as a true trees. Meanwhile, larch, because it's have a higher resistance, it is in the areas where it is straight, Siberian pine still keeps prostrate form. And ribbons are actually they typically observed on the leeward slopes. Here again, satellite scene, which taken again that keyhole spy images in 1968, and this is images taken in 2010. And you see the this is trees, boundary of the trees, and that for that period, we observed an increasing and uphill migration of the wave by wave. These trees are migrated uphill. And this is just show in the high scale how they are formed. And the ribbon mechanism formation. Firstly, since warming promotes upward tree diffusion of regeneration, regeneration established by microtopography shelters like in the hedges. Tree growth increase snow accumulation behind the trees, a snow fence effect, as was described by Billings. The resulting snow drift are oriented around perpendicular to the wind direction. Here, for example, we see that it is taken in July in the southern mountains, and you see that snow drift, and within the snow drift accumulate. Later snow melting, etc. Less grown period, and this is in Kuznets-Altau mountains. So this is formation of the ribbons. And then you just I will tell in details. It is again phases of evolution of the ribbons. They are coming up, and starting from here actually. No, it is a delta between these images. And then you see in the end is downhill, and they are formed, they transform to the closed forests. For example, these hedges, this is a picture of those hedges. And here are some estimates of tree uphill migration within ribbons. And the final note, in the severe habitat of the Alpine Tundra, trees are used different mechanism to adapting, also using so-called bark photosynthesis. What is bark photosynthesis? Concentration of chlorophyll in the bark approximate up to 70% its concentration in leaves. And see, for example, here to the willow species, it is absolutely leaf free, no one leaf, but it's still alive and it is still growing because bark contains a chlorophyll and bark assimilates carbohydrates, and trees is growing. Also, these very high resistant larch at the edge of the surviving, the lower part of the crown is crippling, but this tree, these stems, look like they're dead. No, they're not dead. They still survive because that phenomenon of back photosynthesis, which can help trees to keep their position at the extremely non-convenient, how say, враждебные, non-friendly growing conditions. It's also, you see on the Siberian pine, you see the here it's that chlorophyll. In conclusions, I just only read the third one. Hedges are the self-organizing systems. Hedges forms an aerodynamically friendly crown shape, which mitigate desiccation and snow abrasion. Hedges soil accumulated biogenic elements. We make measurements, nitrogen increased by 1.5 times, phosphorus 2.5, potassium 7.5, and sulfur 2.0. Hedges within impact zone, hedges impact zone, which is protected. You see that this is a very shallow, just a very narrow strip of the hedges protected zone around, but in some hedges they are more wide there. That in this impact zone, regeneration number higher than outside. It's figures about 10.5 or 10 times more. And at the final stage of the ribbons and hedges evolution, these structures may be transformed into the closed forest. Thank you, dear colleagues.